Another day spent by the fire. Another good time with good friends. Another handful of great stories. And me, your favorite narrator, Dr. Plague. Or at least in the top 10, I hope. So let's start another day of cozy horror with some more great stories, shall we? It's rough writing sometimes. You want to be inclusive, you want to be entertaining, you want to be interesting, you want to be good. But it's true what they say sometimes, that art imitates life. And sometimes that imitation can get a writer in trouble. So let's hear about today's writer, or as we call him, the Ghost Writer.
Mr. Fuller. The tall man looked up through the curtain of greasy black bangs, and his face was equal parts good-natured annoyance and unshakable certainty. Detective Cutter liked the annoyance. Annoyed men could become angry, and angry men could make mistakes. But the certainty was going to make this exchange difficult. A man who was certain was a man who would play the game to win, and Detective Cutter was just as certain that this man was guilty. "Do you know why you're here?" Cutter asked, and he put the box down between them as he stood leaning over Fuller. He could not have done this if Fuller was standing. Of course, if Fuller had been any further into 6 feet, he would have been playing basketball somewhere instead of writing crime novels. Cutter was all of 5 feet, and only because his red Irish curls put him over the limit. He stood over Fuller now, though, not glowering, but not smiling, from a position of power that Fuller's certain and almost bright smile did not seem to understand. The game was over in the 9th inning, Holmes, and now it was all over but the crying. Fuller looked up at him like a professor looking at a bright pupil who's just broken the cardinal rule and asked a foolish question. "Don't you know?" he asked in a deep, cultured voice that made Cutter want to start slapping him. "I assumed that you must have after 2 officers came to my office to collect me." "Collect you?" Cutter snorted. "Mr. Fuller, you were arrested, Mirandized, and placed in an interrogation room. I'd say that's about as far from collected as it gets." "Come on, Officer Cutter. We both know that if you could charge me with anything, we wouldn't be here having this little chat right now." Cutter grabbed the chair next to him and spun it so he could lean against the back as he sat. It was a distinctly juvenile posture, but he accepted it as he settled in for the long match. He was tired, bone-weary from chasing this guy's shadow for the last 3 weeks, and he'd be damned if he'd let him slip away now. Marcus Fuller was going to answer for these murders if he had to sit here all week, and Cutter was settling in for the long run. "My captain likes you for this. Hell, I like you for this, and we have solid evidence that if you didn't pull the trigger yourself, then you know who did." Fuller just rolled his eyes. "And why would I want to commit murder? I'm a very successful writer with 2 Sunday Times bestseller noir awards. I live very comfortably, and I could easily retire from writing after my next book and maintain that comfort for the rest of my life. Why would I jeopardize that by killing prostitutes and thugs?" "Let's talk about that prostitute, shall we?" Cutter said as he reached into the box and took a thick manila envelope out. He flipped it open onto 2 pictures of a pretty brunette in her early 40s. The top photo showed her inviting guests into a newly opened Royal Casino, while the bottom was her being booked a few years before for solicitation. Her expression was the same in both photos, devil-may-care attitude with a side order of iron poise. Marjorie Dyer, the proprietor of Dire Needs, was found murdered in her suite at the Seawind Resort. He flipped the page, and behind it were several shots of a glassy-eyed Marjorie, who was no longer poised or so devil-may-care. She lay naked across a hotel bed, with a long, angry cut from one ear to the other, and a thick collar of blood clotting around the wound, making it hard to see. Hotel staff received a noise complaint about 11, and hotel security found her that way at 11:30. He had hoped the grisly scene would shock Fuller. He had hoped for revulsion, hoped Fuller would turn green or be sick in the wastebasket, or even that he would appear excited by the photos and tip his hand in front of the detective. Instead, he studied them for a moment and then looked back at Cutter expectantly. "Very graphic, Officer Cutter. What does this have to do with me?" Detective Cutter reached into the box as he spoke. The murder scene of Marjorie Dyer is nearly the same as the killing of Catherine Hoff in your book Hunter City. He removed a dog-eared paperback from the box, and Fuller didn't seem at all surprised to see it. If you'll indulge me, Mr. Fuller, and before Fuller could protest, Cutter had opened the book to the paragraph in question. Hold her, Jack. I'm about to send Regis a message. As the switchblade came to life, Kat began to struggle between Jack and Anthony. Her tears made black pools of her mascara, and when Hunter lifted her chin to look her in the eye, she had long tracks down either side of her face. He waggled the blade in front of her, and she cringed away as the steel glinted in her eyes. Please, Glenn, please don't do this. We can make a deal. I'll work for you instead of Regis, but please don't hurt me. And she dissolved into shuddering sobs again. She stopped when Hunter pressed the edge against her throat. It's nothing personal, Kat. It's just business. She sighed like a split seam as the knife parted her flesh and her blood poured across the swell of her modest breasts. When Hunter's gentleman released her, she fell back onto the bed with a kind of boneless grace. Hunter only spared her a final glance before he strode into the hall and left her alone in his makeshift abattoir. Fuller indulged him as he read, and when Cutter finished, he only sat expectantly. What do you make of that, Mr. Fuller? Cutter asked, when it seemed Fuller would not break the silence. Seems like a fan of my work decided to reenact some of his favorite scenes. As I told you the first time you came snooping around my office, I was at a charity event that night. 12 people will corroborate that I was present until well past midnight. So unless I'm under arrest for writing a compelling crime drama, are you familiar with the murder of Gerald and Jamal Smith, Mr. Fuller? Cutter cut him off mid-sentence. Men like Fuller hated to be cut off, and he felt confident that the act would unnerve him. It didn't. I'm afraid I'm not, Fuller said, crossing his arms and appraising Detective Cutter with light disapproval. They were hired muscle for Selectman Kane, a local crime boss in the area, all three of whom also bear a striking resemblance to Boyle, Barker, and Regis Angel from Hunter Street. Fuller rolled his eyes and sighed deeply in his throat. Do tell. Both Gerald and Jamal were visiting a tavern below Kane's office when their drinks were spiked with Rohypnol. Both were large men, Mr. Fuller, and both had a lot of experience with guns, as did Boyle and Barker. Boyle and Barker, as you recall, were drugged by Glenn Hunter before he assailed the home of Regis Angel. Both sets were shot on the stairs as they tried to return to their boss. Their nerves dulled, they were easy prey for both Glenn Hunter and our current mystery killer. Then, of course, there's the nature of Selectman Kane's death. Let me guess, said Fuller. Drowned in the bath? Cutter flipped through the file and settled it back on the table. Close. Drowned in the sink. The photos were of a man in his late 50s, lying face up in a utility sink. His shoulders had been forced down into the wide basin, and his face was a spiderweb of cuts and scratches where the faucet had battered him. One of his eyes bulged grotesquely, as the other stared glassily at the photographer. Fuller looked at this with no more interest than he had the others, and when he looked up, his eyes questioned Cutter on what he hoped to accomplish. He didn't catch Selectman Kane in the bath. He was forced to improvise by drowning him in a utility sink. Kane fought, but forensics says his attacker finally broke his back and forced him down into the utility sink to properly drown him. That's not from one of my books, Officer Cutter, as well you know. No, but Hunter did drown Regis in a bathtub after killing his bodyguards in a stairwell. I got the passage somewhere here. He removed his copy of Hunter Street from the box as well. He turned to the back and saw Fuller wince as he bent the pages back to read the highlighted paragraph. That's more of a reaction than he had given to the entire photo album, Cutter thought, as his eyes found the spot. Hunter watched as Wagner's eyes went wide as he pushed through the bathroom door. Wagner reached for the gun in his jacket, but the little silenced pistol in Hunter's hand woofed softly. He felt the angry burn as the acoustics of the bathroom turned the Rise of the Valkyries into a cover for the loud, wet slap of the body as it hit the floor. Hunter entered the small door between the bathroom and the washroom unnoticed. As he pushed the large form of Regis Angel under the water, he was rewarded with total surprise. The old man was still quite strong, and had it not been for the surprise of the attack and the slippery bathtub in which he was lounging, Hunter thought that he would have been in for a real fight. As he drowned him, he bent over him so he could watch the life leave his eyes. If you watch a powerful man draw his last breath, some of his spirit will be transferred to you, boy. His grandfather had told him this 1,000 times if he'd told him once. As the struggling stopped and the great shadow of Regis Angel left the world, however, Hunter felt little save the deep sense of satisfaction and a staggering sense of loss. "You're reaching, Detective," Fuller scoffed, but Cutter noticed the change in title, and it seemed a victory, if a small one. "He was drowned on his back, Mr. Fuller, which leads us to believe his attacker wanted to watch him die." "Which supports the theory of a copycat," Fuller barked, pushing up from his seat to glower at Cutter. "Just because you beat this dead horse over and over again, Detective, does not mean it's going to give you anything but... Your third book was a bit of a disappointment, wouldn't you say, Mr. Fuller?" That shut him right up. He stopped mid-sentence and goggled at Cutter, as if he couldn't believe what he just heard. If Fuller wanted to play the copycat game, Cutter was ready to drop his final bit of damning evidence. He was more than happy to let Fuller back himself into the corner first, though. Fuller blew out a long breath. "I don't see how that's relevant at all to your case." "A dozen rewrites, not well received by the fans, and the reception at the ending was bad enough that you had to write a fourth book and turn the Hunter trilogy into a Hunter quartet. That had to sting a little, wouldn't you say?" That was a decision I made on my own," he snapped, but Cutter didn't care. He had this guy, and he knew it. The first 2 pieces were only appetizers, and after he served up the main course, he'd be more than happy to give this guy his just desserts. "Well, the most recent murder was very reminiscent of another scene from your book." "Oh, please, do tell. Someone kill a big stupid brute on the street with a machine gun? Poison a congressman? Maybe slit a whore up the..." Cutter threw down an open folder and watched the pompous prick deflate like an old balloon. "We had to request the manuscript from his secretary when we found out you had written a 4th novel. She was so distraught that she sent it over immediately. This, Mr. Fuller, is the reason you're here." Fuller looked far more unsettled by these photos than anything else that day. This can't be. I just talked to Dan last week. Danforth Wilde was murdered in his apartment last week, 3 days after you threatened him over social media for stealing the premise of Hunter State for his noir series. You said you would make him regret every word he published, didn't you? I guess maybe he regrets it now, doesn't he?" Fuller sat, looking at the pages for several seconds, before closing his eyes and sighing. He was eviscerated, just like the congressman in Hunter's stand. "My agent was the only one who had a copy of the manuscript, so of course, you think..." He closed the folder and glared at Cutter. "Hook me to a lie detector, Detective. Call my assistant and ask her where I was when Dan was killed. I have no receipts for travel, I have taken no leave from work, and you will find no way I could have done these things. Now, unless you're prepared to hold me under suspicion, I demand that you release me." Cutter stared at him for nearly a minute before shaking his head with a deep sigh. He had hoped he could grill the answers out of Fuller, but the guy was too slick for that. His captain was going to rake him over the coals for this one, and Cutter could already hear the sounds of pens signing his leave of absence. "Go, then," he said, waving his hand at the door, and Fuller left with a little slam as the door shut behind him. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of suspension from duty. Cutter drained the whiskey from his glass and slid it back towards Mike. He had had his first drink right here at the Fighting Cock, and he suspected it would be where he took his last. You shake enough trees like he had, and you were bound to have something fall on you eventually. Guys like Fuller, though, they made him ache for a drink. The door jingled, and Cutter didn't even look up as someone plopped down next to him. They thought I might find you here," said a familiar, cultured voice. "I need your help." Cutter blew a chuckle into his shot as he knocked it back. "You dance around justice, get me suspended for 3 weeks, and expect me to..." He flinched a little when he looked at him. Fuller had a long, jagged cut across his face, and his left eye looked like a few more punches would have broken the socket. He caught Mike's eye and the barman seemed to be trying to decide whether to call the police or let Cutter handle this. In the end, he offered him a rag from behind the bar and slouched off out of earshot. Fuller sat down next to him, and his eyes darted towards the door like a trapped animal. "I need you to protect me. The man who's been murdering these people has been staying with me for several months now. He's also responsible for the 4th Hunter book, and until tonight, I thought his killings were something benign, a way to clean up the streets, if you will. When I confronted him about Dan, though, he just went crazy and tried to kill me in my apartment." "Slow down," said Cutter, as he took a pad from his pocket. "Let me get some information first." He wobbled a little on his stool as the alcohol settled over him like a cloud. The shots were beginning to catch up with him, but he wanted to be sure he got everything verbatim. If he could bring this information to his captain, then maybe they'd rescind his suspension. "Let's start with a name. Who tried to kill you?" Fuller took a deep breath before saying the last name Cutter would have ever expected. "Glenn Hunter."
All this cold out here makes me want to take my own tropical getaway. Though, maybe in a different place than wherever this next story takes place. It sounds like a fine locale, but the company leaves a lot to be desired. So, let's find out about our narrator and her less than restful getaway.
Liz couldn't really say she didn't know why she was here, but she could question why. Why a wise and just God would leave her here was beyond her, and if this was his plan, she wasn't sure of his wisdom. She could see him standing in the shadow of the palm trees, eyes red like a dog caught in the flash of a camera. All it did was stare, but she felt as if it wasn't all it intended to do. The trip had been one they'd planned for years, a girls' trip to the Bahamas, just her and her old sorority sisters, on a cruise for 5 sun-soaked days. Liz had been looking forward to it. It'd be nice to get out of the house for a while. Her BA in administration had mostly made a great dust catcher in the last 8 years since her graduation. Between the kids, the house, and her husband, and her call center job that she did to bring in a little spending money, she had little time for anything else. Well, that wasn't entirely true. Liz had contented herself with talking with her old sorority sisters, Janet, Claudia, and Maria, about their lives and what they'd all been up to. Janet wrote for a food blog, she and her husband jet-setting around as he ran his export business, and Liz loved to hear about all the foreign places she found herself in. Claudia was a lawyer, always the brains of the bunch, and Liz often celebrated with her over the computer about her courtroom victories. Maria was a designer in New York, and Liz would be lying if she didn't admit that she grudgingly lived vicariously through her bestie. Maria lived like one of the girls on Sex and the City, with a constant diet of different men, different gigs, and different problems that seemed to fix themselves before they got out of hand. Liz's life, in contrast, was pretty mundane. Her friends gushed appreciatively over the pictures of her kids, none of them having any, but it was clear that their admiration was mostly lip service. They were out living spectacular lives, while Liz was stuck in the gilded cage with her eggs. She was comfortable. Harold was a good man who took care of the bills and gave her whatever she wanted. She loved her kids dearly, but watching her friends as they went about their lives made her feel like hers was going nowhere. As she sat beside the fire, alone and watching the red-eyed creature, she now wished that she had stayed in her comfortable rut. When she had told Harold about the trip, his only real concern had been who would watch the kids. Harold was a dutiful husband, but he reminded her of an old song her mother had liked. She couldn't remember the name, but her mother had played it on cassette as she cleaned the house. Harold reminded her of a line from the song, one her mother always sang in tones of deepest disgust, a line that embodied Harold as much as it embodied her own father. "I'll raise the children while you go have a beer. Where is my John Wayne? Where is his shining gun? Where's my lonely ranger? Where have all the cowboys gone?" It was a good line. It had encompassed her life so well. Harold was not the owner of an export business. He wasn't a model or a defense attorney who might be moved to sleep with her after a trial. Harold was an assistant manager in a company that made oil drilling equipment. He was nice enough, he was stable, but his interest in her had clearly waned. It had happened sometime after their second child. She saw his eyes began to wander, and if he wasn't already having an affair, then his impending midlife crisis would surely drive him into one. She had assured him that her sister would watch the kids while he was at work, but that he might have to miss his after-work bar trips this week. "I'm sure she'll watch them on Saturday, though, so you can meet your associates at the links for your golf game." In retrospect, she thought he might have been a little too glad to hear how her sister, 19 and home from college, would be coming to sit with the kids. But that might just be in her head. The news that he could still golf on the weekends had softened his mood a bit. He even slipped her a few extra hundreds so she could fly to Orlando instead of driving. The idea that she might be stuck in traffic and miss her cruise was comforting now. But as she thought about the reunion with her friends, it brought a smile to her cracked lips. They had all met at the airport. First Liz and Maria, with Janet and Claudia flying in an hour later. The four had gone to dinner, drinking and talking about what they'd been doing, and finally boarded the boat at nightfall. They'd had a grand send-off with fireworks and champagne, and the four of them had talked excitedly about what they would do once they arrived in the Bahamas. "Hope your husbands gave you a day pass, ladies," Maria joked with Janet and Liz, "'cause you never know who you might meet on this trip." As Liz stared at the man-shaped thing, its unblinking eyes focused on her like twin beams. She wasn't sure that this was the someone that Maria had meant. It had all been smooth sailing until the second night. The four of them had drank at the bar, dined in the main hall, watched a few of the floor shows, and gone to bed thoroughly pleased. Maria had come in a little later, after leaving with a fella from the bar, and Liz wondered if she might pick up a fling of her own. She had turned red at the thought. Did she dare do such a thing? She didn't think she could, but who knew what a trip might bring? The second day had been spent around the pool. Liz was a little more self-conscious than the other three. She'd never quite gotten her figure back after her second child, but that didn't stop the eyes from finding her. They soaked up the sun, pretending to ignore the ogling eyes of those who looked, and Liz felt desired in a way that she hadn't since college. Harold did his duty at least once a week, but she'd come to suspect that that was out of habit. The men who looked at her and her friends seemed willing to do far more than their duty, and the thought made her smile as she watched them from behind her sunglasses. They had dressed in their best that night, their reservations at the captain's table being semi-formal, and Liz thought she might find herself in someone else's bed besides her own later. She was feeling confident in a way that she hadn't since she had met Harold, and as they laughed over drinks and appetizers, she wished the night would never end. When the ship stopped suddenly, groaning as if it had hit something, and lurching like a wild animal, she hoped she was asleep in her bunk still, her afternoon nap still ongoing. Now she knew better. As she felt her eyes getting heavy and heard the strange singing that had marked every evening after the first, she knew that the nightmare never ended. They started to evacuate soon after the sudden stop. The ship had run up against something, and it had shredded the side. Liz and her friends were shoved into a lifeboat with about a dozen others. They bobbed out into the night as the boat rode low in the water, its guts filling with the balmy island sea. Liz reflected that at least there had been enough boats for everyone, as the crewmen rowed them towards a collection of islands nearby. As Liz sat beside her friends, the adrenaline starting to ebb and the ocean rocking her amidst the warm bodies, she felt herself starting to drift off. You'd have said that such a thing was impossible, but she could hear others yawning and one particularly loud snorer behind her. She leaned her head against Maria and felt the other woman breathing heavily. It appeared Liz wasn't the only one getting tired, and as she drifted off, she thought she heard the first snatches of a song that would become very familiar. When she woke up, she found herself alone. The boat beached as the surf pushed it in and out amongst the sand of some unknown island. Liz had no idea how long she had been there, but the fact that she was alone filled her with a palpable dread. Where had everyone gone? Was she the only one left out of the 20 or so people in the boat? She got up, but immediately sat down as her sleeping legs refused to hold her. She tried to rub some of the feeling back into them, her hands as numb as her legs, and that was when she noticed the thing around her finger. It was a ring, woven from coconut fibers, and she couldn't remember seeing anything like it before. Where had it come from, and who had put it on her? It was tight on her finger, but Liz couldn't call it uncomfortable. It sat flush against her skin, and as she lifted it up to take a better look, she saw the creature for the first time. The island swam with fog, the trees and sand leading her to believe that it must be tropical. She had seen him in the mist, leaning against a palm tree as he stared at her. The two locked eyes, and she felt her skin crawl as he stared silently. It was as if they were the only two in existence, and the longer it went on, the less human he began to look. His arms became less human as they thickened and waxed and waned. Its legs appeared to double, then triple, and its head bulged oddly before returning to its normal dimensions. It was man-shaped, but certainly no man. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but when it turned its head suddenly, the spell was broken. She heard Maria calling her through the fog, and when she turned back to look, it was gone. "Glad you're finally awake," Maria said. "We got a little worried when you wouldn't wake up." How long was I out for?" Liz asked, getting shakily to her feet as the pins began to recede. "Nearly a whole day. We left 3 others out here with you. Did all you wake up at the same time?" Liz shook her head as Maria took her arm and led her up the beach through the fog. "We've been trying to make something that will get the attention of ships or planes, but the fog is so thick I'm not sure anyone will see us. The rest of us have been trying to get some shelters up, but it's hard to find materials and all this." As they came through the fog, Liz could see that there were around 15 others milling about. Men, women, even a couple of kids went about their tasks without much enthusiasm. They looked at Liz disinterestedly as she and Maria approached, and Liz saw Janet and Claudia as they turned rocks into words so a plane might see them. They both waved as they walked over to them. The rest of the day was spent raising lean-tos and setting up fire pits. She met some of the others, her fellow castaways, and they seemed to have quite a mixed bag. There was Ben and his sister Catherine, Angela and her daughter Celeste, Margot, Roger, his boyfriend Francis, Tracy, who carried around a typewriter case with a manuscript inside, Gail, Kathy, and her son, Gregory. They feasted on nuts and fruit, coconuts, and some little crabs that Ben and Francis had managed to scare up around dusk, and as they ate, the group discussed what they would do tomorrow. "It might be nice to take stock of the island," Ben said. "Find out if there are any others here." "A source of fresh water might be good, too," Maria put in, and Liz couldn't help but notice that she kept looking shyly at the older man as he agreed. Liz tried to keep up, but it was hard to focus on planning. It's hard to focus on anything with the pair of red eyes that stared at her from the nearby palm tree. No one else seemed to have noticed it, and the longer it stared, the more she realized that it was staring only at her. Whatever the creature was, it seemed to have eyes only for Liz, though the attention was far from flattering. Her finger itched, and Liz realized that it was the first time she had thought about the ring in a while. She wondered if it had been given to her while she slept. Why not just take her too, if it had gotten that close? As the others began to get comfortable, Liz watched the creature in the fog as it stood its lonely vigil, which was why she was still awake when the singing began. Liz didn't know where it came from, or whether it had anything to do with the mysterious voyeur, but she blinked a little too long and found the red eyes had gone when she was awake. She sat blinking, the sounds of snoring vibrating around her. The night was suddenly split by a heavy baritone. It rolled across the sleeping people, hitting Liz like the warm steam off a cup of tea. As she watched, a few of her fellow survivors staggered up, getting to their feet and walking towards the jungle. They moved like sleepwalkers, their legs taking them shakily into the fog. In the dark, Liz wasn't certain who it had been, but in the morning, there were 2 less than there had been the day before. She hadn't slept that night, but as the sun came up and turned the fog into a blanket of diamonds, she pretended to. The last thing she wanted was to answer questions about missing people. No one seemed to notice at first, but by noon the disappearance of 2 people was hard to ignore. "Any idea where Roger and Francis are?" Catherine asked, looking around like she might have just missed them. "Off doing God knows what, I'm sure," Ben muttered, drawing some dark looks from a few of the others. He had made his displeasure at the pair of them pretty clear to everyone but them, and didn't seem to care about their disappearance too much. A couple of people talked about going to look for them, but it was finally decided that if they had gone off on their own, then they would either come back or they wouldn't. People went about their day, some looking for food, others trying to find planes or boats to hail. As the day spun out, Liz wondered if she should tell someone what she had seen the night before. She hadn't told anyone about the man-shaped thing in the jungle, and if it was the same thing taking people, maybe they needed to know. Her thoughts chased her throughout the day, but as the sun set and the fire cast sparks into the night sky, Liz found herself awake and searching for the creature. She hadn't had far to look. It had been there since dusk, just watching her as she sat by the fire. The fog was still a thick pea soup, and the image within it swelled and distorted as she kept an eye on it. Her head dipped and jittered as she tried to stay awake, but when the singing began tonight, it was like a sweet lullaby. She saw 3 shapes rise around her, the fire turning them into silhouettes against the sparks, and as they stumbled away from the dancing flame, she tried to call out to them, to raise some kind of an alarm. She was fading away as the deep, resonant voice drowned her amidst the crashing waves of the beach, however, and soon she found herself asleep. The camp awoke to find they were 10 now, and Liz discovered that one of the shades had been Claudia. Another had been Angela's daughter, and she was beside herself with grief. "Has anyone seen Celeste? She was right here next to me when I fell asleep last night." "We should go look for them," Maria suggested, looking pleadingly at Liz and Janet as she tried to move the others to go with her. Most didn't seem keen on going off into the mist to hunt for people who'd disappeared, especially if there was something out there taking them. Liz found it impossible not to be moved by Maria's words, though, and Janet seemed to feel the same. Claudia was their friend, and Celeste was just a child. The thought of them lost and scared in a strange place made Liz's heart ache, and the 3 assured Angela that they would try their best to find her daughter. She thanked them tearfully. The disappearance had left her in a state of grief so deep that she could do little but sit and rock as she cried. In the end, the 3 set out to search for those who had disappeared, and the others watched them leave, with not much expectation that they would see them again. The foliage smooshed wetly underfoot as they searched, the fog a constant blanket around them. The palms gave way to thin pines and wispy spruces that seemed to grow small, round nuts. The ground was far too wet to see much. Any footprints that might have existed were obliterated by the soupy ground, and as the 3 women searched the jungle, they found no trace of the missing people. Liz was no tracker, but in the movies there were always signs left behind when someone went missing in the woods. Fabric left on a tree, hair hanging from a branch, maybe a swatch of blood smeared across the bark. But there was none of that here. It was as if the island had swallowed them up, leaving nothing behind to mark their passage from life to death. The whole time, Liz felt like she was being followed. She glanced fitfully around as she looked for the man-shaped thing. She caught the odd glance of something, some vague shape amidst the mist, but it was impossible to tell if it was her voyeur or not. She felt pursued, this thing dogging her heels wherever she went, and she began to wonder if it was the thing that had summoned them to the island. Were they all just lunch for this creature? A game of cat and mouse to break up the monotony of its existence? When the sun began to set, they were forced to head back to camp empty-handed and heavy-hearted. Angela was inconsolable. The group came together for her, but their eyes were more often than not on the jungle. The fires were stoked, and as people began to get comfortable for sleep, Liz found herself too tired to join them. She had collapsed after they'd returned from the search, exhausted from all that walking, and her sleep had been heavy and dreamless. That night, Liz finally got to meet her mysterious watcher, and it likely saved them from another loss. It was late when she jerked awake, unsure how long she'd been asleep. The fire was burning low now, the ashes flickering into the sky as the logs crumbled beneath the assault of the heat. Liz thought at first that the waves had woken her up, but as she glanced into the gathering shadow, she could see those red eyes as they bore into her. They were closer now, maybe 15 feet away, but Liz was finding it harder and harder to be terrified of her mysterious watcher. The longer she sat looking at those red eyes, the more curious Liz found herself. "Hello?" she asked, keeping her voice low so as not to wake anyone up. The red eyes blinked, unsure, but when a voice answered her, it was very different from the deep baritone she'd heard singing at night. "Hello," it answered, its voice unsure as its features remained unknowable from behind the thick fog. Do you live here?" Liz asked, feeling foolish almost at once. It had been here since before they got here. Of course it lived here. "Yes, for most of my life, I think." The two talked for a bit, Liz becoming more comfortable the longer it didn't simply leap on her and gobble her up. It confirmed her suspicions that the island wasn't boundless and that her group of survivors were the only people here. She asked about the fog, and it told her that it just always was here, but that it kept everything nice and cool, so it wasn't unwelcome. It would have amazed her how quickly she fell into a normal conversation with this creature if she hadn't been so absolutely exhausted. As it stood, it seemed like the most natural thing to have happened in a while. "Are you the one singing at night?" she asked after it finished telling her about the caves near the edge of the island. It was beginning to lighten on the horizon, and Liz realized that it might leave before she got some of her burning questions answered. The eyes had been crinkling a little as it spoke, clearly enjoying their talk, but as she asked about the song, they took a different downturn. Was it mistrust, or was he ashamed of the answer? "Yes, that's me," he answered, clearly hesitant. Are you the one—" "Liz?" someone said sleepily, and Liz turned to see Maria sitting up groggily. Who are you talking to?" Liz turned back to introduce Maria to the thing she'd been so comfortably chatting with, but it was gone. "No one. Must have been talking in my sleep," Liz answered. There were no new missing people in the morning, but it did little to help the tension. Ben had started talking about making spears or something to defend themselves, but most of the others were more concerned with surviving. Even so, the foragers took homemade spears he had made when they went to look for food. His sister Catherine tried to talk to him, telling him that he was making everyone anxious, but he loudly told her that everyone should be worried about whatever was taking people in the night. Angela looked like a ghost as she sat looking at the waves, and people seemed content to give her space. She was mourning the loss of her daughter, and it was unclear whether her tears were swelling the ocean or the ocean was rushing forward to give her its salt. Liz found herself thinking about the odd creature as she went about her day. It hadn't been like she had expected, and she found herself wondering if it had really been the one taking people. She still hadn't told anyone about it, and most of the others would have assumed that she was going crazy. The thought of those red eyes creeping up to talk to her in the night would have scared some of them and made others think that she was losing it. Worse yet, she suspected that Ben would stay up and try to fight it if she told him, so she kept her mysterious new friend to herself. For the next week, she would stay up after the fire burned low and meet with it. She didn't hear the singing on those nights, and the red eyes seemed more than happy to come back night after night so they could learn more about her. Whatever it was, it seemed very interested in Liz and the life she had lived on the mainland. They talked about boats and cars and television, the food she used to eat, the people she'd known, her family, anything else the creature could think of. Liz would find herself watching him as his body did strange things, thickening and shriveling, multiplying and dividing, and the longer she watched it, the less afraid she became. The longer they talked, the less substantial it seemed to become, and that worried her. Liz found that she was afraid of losing it, the thing that made her feel almost normal. The mist seemed to clutch at it, making its features even less recognizable, and it added a level of unreality to it. It made it seem as if it were fading away. "Can I tell you a secret?" it said suddenly, leaning in close one night and causing Liz to blink as the fog pattered against her face. "Sure," she said, glad for a break in conversation. Liz had been worried that she might run out of things to talk about, and then it would go away. She'd forgotten to be afraid of it, and was glad for the company and the attention this thing showed her after everyone else had gone to sleep. She missed her family and her children most of all, but having it here to talk to made it a little easier, a little more tolerable. "When you first noticed me, I had come to watch you." "Me?" Liz asked, surprised. "Why me?" "I noticed you when your boat came. You were just sitting there, sleeping, and I couldn't take my eyes off you. That's why I gave you the ring." Liz had been struggling with the conflicting nature of being both uncomfortable at the idea of this thing watching her and strangely flattered by its attention. When was the last time anyone had paid that sort of attention to her? Certainly not at home. Certainly not since she left college and started her descent into wedded bliss. She jumped a little when he mentioned the ring, having almost forgotten about it until right then. Sometimes she would go all day without thinking about it, and then it would suddenly catch on something, or the scratchy fibers would peel at her skin like steel wool, and she would remember that it was there. "You gave me the ring?" she asked, watching its head wobble oddly. "I did," and though it sounded like it wanted to say more, it was unsure how to proceed. "I don't know what to say," Liz said, knowing exactly what she wanted to say, but unsure if she could ask. The two sat in silence for a few minutes, just listening to the waves break on the beach as they stared at each other. "Why don't you ever sing any more?" Liz asked suddenly, causing the eyes to back up a little bit. They backed further away, getting closer to the tree line, but still unable to look away from Liz. Why don't you sing any more?" she asked again, and this time it sounded like an accusation. He was almost 30 feet away, but Liz still heard him when he whispered the secret he'd longed to keep hidden. "Because I don't want to hurt you, but I'm so hungry." As the sun came up, dispelling some of the fog, Liz was left with nothing but her confusion of mismatched feelings. Whatever he was, he managed to hold out for another 3 days. Liz didn't see him again until the third night, and that was when she heard the singing. Liz had thrown herself into any task she could find, trying to take her mind off of him. She wasn't exactly sure when he had gone from it to a him, but the transition made her wary. She'd been working to leave the island, wanting to return to the life she'd known, but now her tasks seemed so pointless. Maria had started lighting fires along the coast in an attempt to get the attention of a passing ship. Janet wanted to make a map of the island, something they could use to explore deeper for supplies. Ben wanted to find better shelter in case the weather changed. Gail wanted to try to find out if they could see the shipwreck at some point on the island, so they could get their bearings. Tracy just wanted to sit and work on her manuscript, and the others seemed content to just exist here until it was all over. It all seemed very trivial to Liz. Despite this, she threw herself into anything that came her way, whether it was scouring the island for resources, looking for somewhere to move the group, or just feeding fuel to the multiple signal fires. All the while, she could feel the eyes of her admirer as they followed her. She never saw him lurking in the mist, but she could sense his presence. He kept his distance, watching her from afar, and Liz was worried that she had offended him. She had suspected that he was the one luring people away, but she hadn't really understood the implication until he'd spelled them out for her. They would never find their fellow survivors, no matter how much they searched, and it was strange to feel so attached to someone who saw you as food. Angela had disappeared on the second day, but Liz doubted that her new friend had anything to do with it. Angela had done little else but weep for 2 days, the sea drinking her tears greedily. She wouldn't eat or drink, wouldn't come to camp no matter what the time, and when they woke up to find her stretch of beach had gone empty, Liz assumed that she had just wandered out into the sea. It might have been the kindest thing for her, but Ben had other ideas. With only 9 of them, Ben and Gale were now carrying clubs and accompanied anyone who left the camp to forage. They had appointed themselves as de facto guardians of the camp, and Ben seemed to have decided that he was their leader. He and Catherine argued often, but his patience for her seemed to be running thin. Kathy and Gregory had taken to sleeping close to Liz and her friends, and Kathy kept a protective arm around her son at all times. Tracy slept with her arms around her typewriter case, holding it like someone might a stuffed animal, but even she had moved closer to the group for protection. When Catherine came to join them on the 3rd night, they all slept in a shallow pile, like rabbits in a warren. Ben and Gale sat around the fire, blinking owlishly as they kept watch. But to Liz, it began to feel more like a prison camp than a group of survivors. Liz woke up on the 3rd night to the sound of singing. She found herself looking for those piercing red eyes amongst the fog, and found his shadowy body not too far away. Dark forms imposed themselves across her vision, and she watched them lumber into the trees before realizing what had actually woken her. It was only Ben by the fire now, Gale having left to go with her mysterious admirer, but now only Tracy's battered typewriter case was left to mark that she had existed at all. Some of the others were beginning to squirm, but instead of lingering, the music began to fade almost at once, making a couple of them jerk quietly as they sat down. One of them had been Janet, all 3 of the women sleeping close enough to each other for some semblance of protection, and as Liz settled back in, she found herself feeling torn about the absence of her mysterious new friend. Ben was upset the next day, enraged by the loss of Gale, and the others stuck close to camp that day. A light rain had blown in, and they seemed content to fix the boat tarp they had taken off the lifeboat to keep the worst of the rain off the fire. They huddled underneath it, shivering as the storm pattered around them. Ben stayed up late, his sleep utterly forgotten, but Liz's visitor didn't come back that night. She supposed he was full after eating so well the night before, but Liz still found her own sleep difficult. She was exhausted, unsure how much longer she could do this, and as she drifted off, she wondered who would be missing in the morning. When Janet's hand slid out of hers, Liz sat up in time to watch her walk out into the rain. The singing was getting farther away already, and when she looked at Ben, she found that he was snoring in the sand after tumbling off the log he'd been sitting on. Liz went after her friend before she could think better of it, and the rain was cold on her face as she moved out into the darkness. It didn't seem to affect Janet at all, and as Liz pulled at her to get her attention, it was like pulling on a stone. She strained at her, looping her legs around her as she tried to trip her up, but Janet's eyes were set as she made her way into the woods. Janet pulled her into the jungle, the two still struggling, and Liz could see those red eyes burning into the depths of her from the woods. "Stop it!" she yelled, tears mingling with the rain and sliding down her face. "Don't take her! She's my friend!" There was silence in the jungle, broken only by the falling of the rain as it hit the thick fronds of the trees. It was almost too loud for her to hear when he spoke, but it was just loud enough to reach her as he slipped into the wet blackness of the surrounding jungle. "Sorry, it's my nature," said the scorpion to the frog. She was left to ponder that as the rain soaked her to the bone, leaving her confused and apprehensive. Maria wrapped Liz in a hug when she came back, the camp awake and holding torches. They had spears too, even Gregory, and Ben pressed one into Liz's hand as Maria let her go. His eyes mistrusted her, but were resolved. He was clearly suspicious of her, but with only 6 of them remaining, he was forced to put his misgivings aside. "We're going after it," he said. And as her eyes grew wide, Ben smiled knowingly. "That's right. I've seen it too. I saw it tonight as you tried to drag your friend back, and I've seen it lurking around the camp more than once. I'm still not sure it's the thing that's taken people, but at this point, I don't much care. We're gonna find it. We're gonna kill it before it kills us." Liz wanted to deny him, wanted to scream at him, wanted to stab the spear into him and make him shut up, but instead, she fell in with Maria, and let him lead her into the semi-darkness. She felt claustrophobic as they made their way into the jungle. Ben had no clue where he was going, but as the sun rose over the horizon, he kept them moving as their torches burned low and their clothes clung to them. They had set out with bellies full of fire, determined to find this thing. They crisscrossed the island, the sun dispelling the shadows as they moved, but they never seemed to find anything that could make a good hiding spot for anything bigger than a bird or a badger. The longer they searched, the more frantic Ben seemed to become. "Where are you?" he kept whispering, looking around frantically as he stalked the groves. "It has to be here somewhere." His need to find the creature seemed insatiable, but by noon, Ben was forced to admit that he had no idea what he was doing. The group was tired and hungry, their legs hurting and the fire in them now quenched by the mist as they turned back towards the campsite. Ben seemed completely demoralized. Catherine finally put a hand on his shoulder, reminding him that they were exhausted and needed to eat, and he was finally forced to turn around and head back to camp. They had covered the whole island, beach to beach, and found no sign of Janet or anyone else. As they trudged back, Ben wasn't the only one looking downtrodden. They all knew that come morning, they would likely be 5 instead of 6. Liz sat by the fire now, remembering the last few days with sobering clarity. Ben had been taken next. He had tried to stay up and keep watch, wanting to catch this thing so he could keep them safe from it. But in the end, he had succumbed and fallen asleep. They had all been so tired after trudging through the jungle, but when they woke up, he was already gone. Kathy was next, and Gregory's cries had brought the rest of them around the next morning. By then, the 4 of them had been frantic. No one wanted to be next, but it seemed inevitable. They were all tired, their meals growing smaller as their numbers dwindled, and they were utterly trapped by the island they now found themselves on. They couldn't fight him. They couldn't escape him. They were nothing but cattle, just waiting for the slaughter. Catherine went next, but by then, Liz already thought she knew what she had to do. When he returned the following night, she was waiting for him. He seemed confused when he found her awake, Maria and Gregory snoring around her, and when she put a finger to her lips, his nod made her stomach churn. "What will you do when they're all gone?" she asked, watching the fire dance between them as the mist made it hiss. He didn't answer her, his red eyes boring into her as he hunkered and watched. "You seem to be saving me for last. Do you hate me so much that you'd make me watch the people I care about disappear before it's my turn?" "Never," he blurted, and she shushed him as Gregory stirred. "I would never torture you like that. It's only that I can't bring myself to hurt you. I need to eat to survive, but I hate that it must come at the expense of you." They pondered this for a moment, the fire hissing and spitting like an angry cat. "What if I went with you now? Would you let these 2 go and take me?" He was silent, but his nod was all the answer she needed. "Lift the mist and let them go, and I'll go with you." He seemed startled. I can't promise your safety. It's hard for me to control my hunger, as you've seen. I'm not sure I could forgive myself if I hurt you. I'm sure you'll have no trouble calling more boats here, just like you did to ours, right?" The eyes looked away sheepishly, but he didn't bother to deny it. "How did you know?" "I guessed. Just like I guessed that this ring might be stopping your song from calling me away at night. Right?" He nodded again. "It won't protect you, though, if I decided to just gobble you up one day when I got hungry." "It's a chance I'll have to take," she said, getting up and walking towards him. The red eyes widened, but as she walked into the mist that surrounded him, the cold membrane encompassed her and accepted her. Liz felt conflicted as she watched the boat leave with Maria and Gregory. The sound of the deep whistle had brought the 2 around as the sun rode high in the morning, and Maria had called her name for quite a while before leaving with the boy. The ship had seen the messages on the beach, seen the smoke from their fires, and Liz had been afraid that Maria wouldn't go for a minute. As the boat grew smaller and smaller on the horizon, a part of Liz wished she was on it. Another part had already accepted that this was her new home, as certain as she was that she belonged with the man whose strange hand now clutched at hers. As strange as it sounded, this had been the trip she wanted. Her old life seemed so dull now. Harold and her children had already started to fade as she stood beside this strange creature. As she turned to look at him, she wondered if she would become like him one day. Maybe he had been like her once, before being discovered by something like him. Maybe he had left a life like hers behind, sacrificing everything because it felt right. Regardless, this was her home now, and as she turned to look at him, she felt complete in a way that she had never felt before.
Whew, I can hear the wind trying to come in through the eaves. It's a good thing we've got this nice cozy fire here, or else it'd be a shiver cast instead of a comfy horror cast, I suppose. We all have a place we like to eat. I know I do. But sometimes those places have weird rules. Maybe things you're not allowed to say or do, or things you're not allowed to eat unless you're a special member. Well, today's rule is don't take more than one fortune cookie at a time, or you might find yourself to be less than fortunate.
I looked at the sign over the register and scoffed loudly. It hung above the bowl of fortune cookies like a silent guardian, and it had never made any sense to me. Customers are cautioned to take one fortune cookie. Taking more than one cookie may be hazardous to the customer's health and sanity. Management. I'd been coming to Yinshi Guzo for the last 10 years, and that sign had always sort of made me roll my eyes. The food this place made was well worth a 5-minute walk from my house, and I had never gotten sick here as I had at other Chinese restaurants. The food was great, the price was fair, and the customer service was second to none. Yinshi Guzo was a place I came to when I was depressed. It was the place I came to when I was celebrating, or when I just needed some comfort food at the end of a long day. It was my all-time favorite restaurant, and I couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather eat. I had actually met my wife here 5 years ago, in fact. Her date stood her up, and I was coming in for some takeout. We both sat in the waiting area, her hoping for a table, since the place was bustling, and me just waiting for my takeout, and struck up a conversation. By the time my food came, she had asked me to stay and eat with her, and I agreed. A year later, we were married, and we've been together ever since, and coming back to Yinshi Guzo as well. I was here again on a Friday night, date night for me and Lisa, waiting for our usual. Sesame chicken with pork fried rice for her, General Tso with white rice for me, and an egg roll each. It was crowded. Yinshi Guzo was always crowded. As I stood before the counter, the sign irked me as I saw it again. Probably because the cookies here were my all-time favorite part of the meal. The owner is a world-class pastry chef, as well as a great cook. He makes the cakes for the shop, and his fried cheesecake is to die for. I think his fortune cookies, though, are the best I've ever had. I know that some of you are going to tell me that fortune cookies aren't an authentic Asian delicacy, but this guy has embraced them at Yinshi Guzo. He makes them from scratch, putting the fortunes in himself, and they're so buttery and delicious that I could eat them by the ton. He refuses to sell them, though, saying that they're only meant to be enjoyed one at a time, and I can't imagine how much money he loses making them like that. Wrapped delicately in their paper holders, they mocked me from the bowl as I stood looking. Leaning forward, I grabbed about 6 of them and popped them into my pocket. I couldn't tell you why I did it, not really, but it was something that I would come to regret. "Your order, sir," said the voice of Miss Kim as she came back. I jumped, looking guiltily as I smiled and thanked her for the food. As I turned to go, I heard her say something almost too low to hear. "Be careful with those. Remember the rules, sir." I turned back, but she had disappeared behind the curtain that separated the front from the back already. I shook it off. I must have misheard her, I thought to myself, as I took my food and left. I traversed the street, weaving between couples and clumps of people on their way downtown, as I made my way home. As I walked, I felt the cookies shuffling around in my pocket and decided to have one. I reached in and pulled out the hand-wrapped paper cover, looking at the little message scrawled on the outside. Good fortune had been written on it,
and I opened the wrapper and picked the fortune out as I ate the delicious cookie in a single bite. It was still soft and warm, and the cookie tasted fresh from the oven. They always seemed to taste like that, and I assumed he made them fresh every day. I looked down at the little paper and thought for a moment that it might have been handwritten, too. Did the owner handwrite his fortunes or something? That level of detail really made these all the more special. I smiled as I read the fortune. Even if it was handwritten, it was still kind of generic for a fortune cookie. Tumultuous times are right around the corner. Aren't they always, I said to myself, putting my key into the lock as I stepped inside. 10 minutes later, I had the wine chilling in the sink, the food transferred to plates, and I'd found the perfect movie on Netflix for us to cuddle up and watch together. I had it all arranged and ready for her. As I switched over to regular TV, the movie primed and ready to play, I looked at my watch and tisked. It was already 8:30. She should have been here by now. She had been working late these past few days, and I was beginning to become worried. I reached into my pocket and pulled out another of the delicious little cookies. I stopped before unwrapping this one, reading the handwritten message on the outside before I opened it. 1 per visit. Don't forget the rules. I felt my brow furrow a little. That was weird. What an odd thing to write on the wrapping of a cookie. I shrugged and pulled it out of its wrapper, pulling the fortune out as I ate the cookie. This one was good, but not as good as they usually were. It was buttery, but a little dry. Tasted like a leftover from yesterday's batch. A sports center came on. I looked at the scrap of paper inside and blew air out in a little chuckle. A loved one is thinking of you. Another classic. My phone rang about that time, and I picked it up, looking at the picture displayed on the home screen. Lisa's smiling face decorated the screen, and I smiled to myself as I picked it up. Hey, honey, you almost here? I got everything ready for date night. Her breathing on the other end was heavy, and it took her a minute to compose herself. Babe, I need to tell you something. I need you to not interrupt me, okay? That made me nervous. Lisa sounded panicked, and I didn't like the thought of her driving while she was in that state. I could hear the sound of her engine in the background, and it sounded like she was driving very fast. I looked at the clock and realized it was later than I thought. Traffic could be nuts this time of night, and I wish she would pull over. Are you okay? You sound like you're... Just listen, and don't interrupt, okay? Okay, I said, hoping this would calm her down a little bit. I took out another one of the cookies as she prepared to speak and unwrapped it absent-mindedly, taking the fortune out with a deft hand. I'm pregnant, she said quickly, in a way that made me think she was expecting me to be upset. Quite the contrary. We had been trying to have a baby for years, but couldn't seem to make it stick. We thought we'd finally made it work a few months ago, but she had ended up miscarrying, and it had hit her really hard. She had really fallen into work, staying late and working on her off days, and these date nights had become our only real time to be together. The news that she was having a baby made me ecstatic. I was confused as to why she was so upset. The cookie was dry as I crunched on it. This one was definitely stale. That's wonderful, dear, I said, through a mouthful of cookie. I'm so happy you... It's not yours, she exclaimed, and the cookie turned to ash in my mouth. I felt it stick in my throat, a dry paste turning to cement, and I hacked it up and spat it on the carpet. It looked a little off as it sat in the congealing mass there, but my mind was not on the cookie. Not mine. How could that be? I've been having an affair for the last 3 months. When we lost Davin, I couldn't get over the depression. Someone at work had been flirting with me for a while, and one night oh God, babe, I don't know what to do. She was crying, and I could already hear it turning jagged and ugly. I wanted to be angry. I tried to be furious, but I couldn't in the face of her sobbing. Come home. We'll work this out, Lisa. We can... Huh? She huffed out, and I heard a loud pop of static before the line went dead. Hello? Hello? Lisa, are you there? Hello? But there was no one. I sat forward, bumping the table and sending the plates I had made spilling onto the ground. I heard the dry snap of the other 2 cookies as they crumbled in my pocket, but I hardly noticed. I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, becoming more frantic with each phone call until I finally bounced it off the carpet floor in a rage. What the hell was going on? What had happened to Lisa? I felt something papery against my palm, and when I looked up, I saw the fortune was plastered against it. I caught sight of the words, and it quelled my rage with cold fear. Your joy will quickly become ashes in your mouth. What the hell was that? That wasn't a normal fortune. Fortunes from cookies were almost always benign, or at least neutral. Did the owner write these himself? Who the hell would put a thing like that in a cookie? I stared at it for a few minutes before retrieving my phone and trying to call her back. The screen was cracked, but that hardly seemed to matter anymore. As my phone remained silent and hers remained unreachable, I was becoming scared. What if something had happened? The fortune continued to nag at me. So far, each of them had been accurate in their own way. What the heck was going on here? This was too elaborate for a prank, and if it was, it really wasn't amusing. I had started to clean up the food I had spilled when the phone finally began to ring. I grabbed it up and prayed that it would be her face I'd see on the screen. Instead, it was a blocked number. It looked odd through the star pattern of my broken glass, and I sat it down. I could once again feel the broken cookies poking at me from my pocket. I reached in and threw both of them on the table. One of them had come unwrapped, and the fortune stuck to my finger as my hand came free. My curious mind would not allow me to ignore it, though. But now I wished I had. You will receive 2 phone calls. Both will bring you only sorrow. I caught the still ringing phone on the 4th ring. Hello? Lisa? I asked hopefully. Hello. Are you the emergency contact for Miss Lisa Callahan? I am, I answered, unsure of what it wanted. This is Officer Winsman. I'm afraid there's been an accident. Is my wife okay? I asked, still a little hopeful. The officer was silent for a few seconds. I'm gonna need you to come down to St. Mark's and identify our remains. The phone slipped out of my hand again, and I could hear the officer saying hello from the carpet. The last cookie sat on the table, ominous in its white paper holder. The edges of the paper were black, whatever was inside having seeped into it. The covering bore a legend that made my breath hitch, and though I felt my hands reach to open it, I wanted nothing so much as to throw it out the window unread. The black letter on the front read, "Those who do not follow the rules are doomed to live with the consequences." My shaking fingers found the white paper just as the phone went silent. I've been lying on the floor of my apartment, smelling the aroma of old Chinese food for the last 3 hours. I don't know what to do. Someone came to knock on my door, but I ignored them. They said they were with the police, but I don't care. Lisa is lost to me, and I fear that may not be the end. I'm almost glad that it may not be the end. The world outside has quieted some as the night stretches on, and I continue to lay on the carpet in the fetal position, using what may be my last few hours to write this message. The black stuff that poured out of that wrapper, bits of moldy cookie floating amongst it, was nothing next to the message that oozed onto the surface. Your end will not be so quick as hers, it said. So if you read this, and you should see that sign telling you only to take 1 cookie, remember that the rules are there for a reason, and those who do not obey them may be forced to live with the consequences.
Brr. Just looking at the title of this next one makes me want to put my socks on. Cold feet are definitely something I don't like to deal with. I'm sure we all have some interesting stories from our time as ne'er-do-well youths, but let's just hope that yours aren't as interesting as this next one. Maybe if someone's ever followed you home, it was an amorous partner who you had fully consented to do so. So let's hope that maybe you don't have to deal with footprints in the snow.
Come on, just one more drink. You know I'm good for it. The bartender looked at me evenly. His dark eyes slitted as he tried to hide his frustration. I know no such thing. You still got money on your books from last week, and you dare to come in here flaunting your wealth? I was a fool to let you drink before you'd settled your tab. Now get out. The other drunks at the bar laughed, egging the bartender on as he crossed his arms. I wanted to argue, but the man was quite a bit larger than me, and I realized the futility of continuing. He would win, just as everyone did when they went up against me. So I hung my head and mumbled something about leaving. As I stepped into the cold winter air,
I felt some of my buzz deteriorate, the derision of my drinking companions following me out into the chill weather. I was too drunk to be walking home, but it was my only means of conveyance. I live in Osaka, at least I did at the time, back in the early 2000s. I was not what you would call a solid citizen. I believe the word most of my culture uses for people like me is a NEET. It basically means I wasn't enrolled in school, wasn't working on a family, and I wasn't working in a job. I'd never been very diligent a worker or a very good student. The jobs I'd had were, well, menial, and often didn't last longer than a month or two. My grades had been good enough to get me into several very expensive cram schools, but not into college. With no real prospects, I'd settled into my life as a nobody. My parents paid for a cheap one-bedroom apartment in a part of town where you had to step over the winos as they stumbled home, and they sent me money to avoid having me come to the house and bring shame on them. I didn't care. All my money went to booze or even less lofty pursuits, and I was essentially circling the drain. I suppose fate had another plan, though, because that was when I met a very special woman on my way home. I had been celebrating a small victory that night, but it seems that my luck had run out. I had a little extra money after my raffle ticket had brought a small windfall, and I'd been buying drinks for a few of the barflies in an effort to get some female companionship that evening. They had taken my drinks and laughed at my jokes, but when the money was gone, so were they. I'd drunk up all my extra money, and after having no luck mooching drinks from the usual bar patrons, I was forced to head home. It was early December, and the snow on the ground was only an inch or two. The black ice glistened treacherously from the damp pavement, and I was trying my best not to weave too much as the bracing air took some of my buzz with it. The streets were mostly deserted, a few late-night pedestrians here and there, and the lights were far from seasonal. We don't really celebrate Christmas in Japan, not like the Americans do, and the lights here were usually from billboards or the advertisements that lit the night as well as the street lamps. I had turned a corner, heading from the trendy part of town I'd been drinking in into the less savory areas where I lived, when I first saw her. I stopped for a moment, not quite believing what I was seeing. It was a youngish woman, her black hair blowing in the wind, and her bare feet walking delicately atop the snow. She was dressed in some kind of robe, a wrapper too light for the weather, and I followed behind her as I tried to find the courage to speak to her. If she was out here and so little on a night like this, then she had to be as drunk as I was. Either that or on some kind of drug, but neither of that mattered much to me. There was heat in my apartment and a little beer in the fridge. We could get warm together, maybe have a little drink, and watch the sun come up over the edge of my balcony. In her current state, I had little doubt that she'd be glad for a warm place to stay, and as I quickened my pace to come even with her, I tried to find my best opening gambit. "Good evening, beautiful. What's a flower like you doing out in the snow?" Now that we were even with each other, I could see her better. Her skin was as perfect as a china doll, her complexion smooth as porcelain, and her color as pale as milk. Her eyes were small and dark, focused ahead as she made her way towards wherever she was going, and it almost seemed like she was ignoring me. That was nothing new. Women often pretended they couldn't see me, but it was the little glances that kept me invested. She kept glancing at me with this coquettish look, favoring me with these intriguing lifts of her lips, and they kept me interested. "Aren't you cold? I know somewhere you can come to warm up. Your feet must be freezing." We were about 5 or 6 blocks away from my apartment, and she seemed to be heading in that direction anyway. I thought my luck might be turning around. The two of us kept walking, me chatting away as she glided across the icy sidewalk. She seemed immune to the black ice that sometimes tripped me up, and I began to notice how smoothly she moved. I know that sounds a little strange, but She moved as if her feet never touched the ground. It was like watching someone operate an extremely lifelike puppet, but it only seemed odd through the lens of memories. At the time, I was just a drunk and slightly amorous male who was hoping to trick this clearly intoxicated woman back to his apartment. I'm not the hero of this story. That should be pretty obvious. "What's your name?" I asked, realizing I didn't even know what her name was. But all I got in return was the same sly side-eye. Her face was utterly emotionless until she glanced at me and smirked. She seemed to know how to keep me interested, and I had become less flustered by the wind the longer we walked. I felt myself slowing to match her pace, my wet socks and cold feet no longer bothering me, and as we turned onto a familiar street, I realized we were about 2 blocks from my apartment. I could even see my window from here, the buttery yellow light spilling out onto the street through the dirty windows of the sliding door, and I smiled as I thought about how the sun would look as it came up through that pallid portal. When she turned suddenly, I almost missed it. We were nearly there, the front gate to my apartment complex, less than 20 steps up the road, and she had suddenly glided into the space between 2 buildings. The alley was a known haunt for winos and bums, and I found myself standing at the entrance as I watched her stroll into the semi-darkness. She'd captured me effortlessly, and when she spun preternaturally in the low light and crooked a finger at me, I was taking that first step before I could stop myself. Luckily for me, the black ice got me before she did. I slipped, falling on my butt, and as the cold rushed over me, I sobered a little. That was how I noticed that, despite the snow in the alley being deep enough to cover the first 3 inches of the garbage can or the dumpster that was there, she hadn't left a single footprint in the snow. I looked back and saw that the only footprints back the way we had come were mine, and that was when something hung in my booze-soaked brain. "Beware the Yuki-onna, my son," my mother had told me when I was very young. "Be careful that she doesn't get you while you're out in the snow." I had stopped on my way out the door, my sled under my arm and my boots unmarked by moisture as of yet, and asked her what that was. "Yuki-onna sometimes hunt handsome men and try to take their life force. It stalks them through the snow, luring them away so it can get them alone, and freezes them in place as it draws out their precious life energy. So if a beautiful woman tries to take you away, come home quick and tell me so I can scare her off." She had said it jokingly, but as I sat in the snow, I realized I was about to do exactly what she had warned me against. The porcelain woman, the woman I now noticed left no trace behind, crooked a finger at me again, but I was up and running before it could waggle more than once. Fortune was with me, and I didn't find another puddle of ice until I reached the stoop of my apartment. I could hear her behind me, her scream the roar of a winter wind, and as I rounded the gate, I came into the courtyard and expected to be pounced on at any minute. It would serve me right, I realized, as I came shakily up the steps of the front porch. I had thought I was the hunter, seeking my prey to lure it home, but I'd been tricked and ran afoul of a much larger beast. I stumbled on the ice near the door, fumbling my key from my pocket, and as I looked up, I saw her reflected in the glass. Her hair was no longer straight, writhing behind her as it rose like a nest of vipers. The wrapper now looked more like a funeral shroud, the edges tattered and dark with grave soil. Her dark eyes were now large and round, their centers full of terrible knowledge, and her jaw was opened much too wide as I slammed the key into the lock and rushed inside. I shoved the door closed behind me, expecting a loud bang as she barreled through it, but when I turned to look from the stairs, the courtyard was empty, save for the snowdrifts. I drank the beer in my fridge alone that night, realizing how close I had come to death, and deciding that it was time to make a change. I called my mother the next day and told her I needed help. That was 20 years ago, and my nights of midnight carousing are behind me. I went to cram school, got my test scores up, and started college. I now work as an engineer. My wife and I met in college, and we got married after she finished her doctorate. We have an apartment in a much better part of town, a son getting ready for high school, and my current life is as far from that apartment where I saw the snow woman as night is from day. I no longer depend on my parents, and I've left the rut that I wallowed in for far too long behind me. I still go out drinking with my coworkers sometimes, but now I'm careful how much I have before making my way home. On the night I barely escaped death, 2 homeless men were found frozen to death in that very alley. The news believed that they had succumbed to the elements, but I think the Yuki Onna was simply looking for a third course in its long meal. Some nights, when the snow falls and the leaves drift on the sidewalk, I sit in my apartment and just wonder if it's still out there, hunting the streets of Osaka for its next meal. Then I remember how lucky I am to have escaped the cold embrace of the Yuki Onna.
One more story for you before I let you get back to your life in general. I know. I'm sure you'd all love to sit here all day while I pretend to be the Appalachian grandpa and tell story after story, but all good things must come to an end. We've all lost someone important in our lives. Well, maybe. I can hope maybe you haven't. My life has been no exception there, but we all have people that we might have liked to have said goodbye to, maybe heard what was on their mind as they passed on. Well, the service provided in this next video is something that could be a blessing or could be a curse. So let's hear about the final thoughts. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Final Thoughts. Final Thoughts would like to give our listeners a 10% discount on their premium package. Wouldn't you like the peace of mind of hearing from your loved ones just one last time? Well, at Final Thoughts, they can... Mark spooled the volume down as he waited for the commercial to end and his podcast to pick back up. He glanced out the window and was greeted by another sign for Final Thoughts. The company was barely a year old, and already they were everywhere. He turned the podcast back up, but wasn't really paying attention anymore. The traffic moved sluggishly around him, like an artery clogged with plaque. He just knew that it would make him late for dinner, and then Lisa would be upset. She hated it when he was late for dinner. The words of the host were cut off suddenly, as his phone chirped and displayed Lisa's picture on the screen. Mark sighed. She was probably calling to ask when he'd be home. She wouldn't be happy when he told her he was going to be late. He'd worked late every day this week, and she had probably made a big surprise dinner for Friday. He considered ignoring it, but knew that would just lead to a bigger fight. He caught it on the 5th ring. "Hey, hun," he said, trying to sound chipper. "Hi, sweetie." Her voice put Mark on edge. They'd been married almost 7 years, and he'd learned how to read her reasonably well in the early parts of their relationship. Her voice was high, unnaturally sweet, and he could already tell that something was wrong. This was the voice she used when she was upset and trying not to show it, when she had bad news but didn't want to tell it. He almost thought he could hear her holding back tears, but didn't want to say so. "Lisa, is everything okay? How was your day? Did you make any big sales?" That took Mark aback. Lisa wasn't usually interested in his work. "Yeah, I made a few big sales. Mr. Copeland said I'm likely a shoo-in for Employee of the Month." That's fantastic, dear. I'm so proud of you." When she said it, there was a slight wince at the end of the word, and Mark could still swear that she was trying not to cry. She was acting strangely. What was going on over there? As Mark sat in bumper-to-bumper traffic, he couldn't help but imagine that someone with a gun was in his house, telling his wife to call him. Maybe someone had died, Mark thought, and she was trying not to tell him until he got home. As the car ahead moved, Mark took his foot off the brake and accelerated forward enough to stop again. Just up ahead, he could see a road worker holding a sign. This was the gatekeeper for a stretch of road laden with roadmen and trucks. This was the source of the traffic, and Mark cursed loudly, realizing that this would take the better part of an hour to get through. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Lisa asked, in that same overly chipper voice that verged on breaking. "Oh, it's road work, babe. Looks like I won't be home for dinner for at least an hour." She made a sound, and to Mark it sounded like a sob. "Oh, I'm sorry, hon. I was hoping you were a little closer. I had something I needed to tell you." Her words broke apart as she spoke, and Mark was getting kind of worried about what was going on at home. "Lisa, is something wrong? You sound like you're barely able to stop yourself from crying. What's going on?" "I promise you won't get mad. I don't want the last thing I hear to be the sound of you mad." Her words sent a chill through him. "The last thing you hear? What are you talking about?" She paused for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully before continuing. "Mark, honey, there was an accident." "An accident? What happened?" A car beeped at him, and Mark jittered forward a little bit. He had expected to hear that someone had died, that dinner was burnt, maybe that there was a bill that had come in and it was really bad. He had thought maybe there was a home invader or a kidnapping plot. He had thought of 1,000 different things, but her being hurt was never one of them. Lisa rarely left the house. When she did, it was always to her destination and back again. Lisa's parents had been killed in a car accident about 10 years ago, and it had all but made her a shut-in. "I don't want to talk about it. Can't we just make our last conversation a happy one? I don't want you to remember me like this after I'm gone," she said, finally breaking down. Mark could hear her crying on the other end, and the sound was too much. When the car beeped at him this time, he ignored it. Mark had already stripped off his seatbelt and was climbing out of his vehicle. The driver blared his horn and yelled at him, but Mark didn't care. He was running up the sidewalk, phone pushed against his ear, as he ran for their apartment. His apartment wasn't far from the office, but he always drove because he didn't want to arrive with his suit smelling of sweat in the street. He had always considered the 30 minutes to an hour it took him to get home as his time. Now he just wanted to get home before his wife breathed her last. "What happened, dear? Just keep talking to me." Her voice was becoming weaker, but he craved it like a starving man wants a slice of bread. I was dusting the lights. I dust them every Friday. They get so dirty during the week. I was up on a stepladder, and I guess one of the brackets snapped. I fell and hit my head on the table. I saw the blood on the floor and knew it was bad. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm such a klutz." "Don't be sorry," he said as he ran up the street. People moved out of his way or they were knocked aside. A woman fell on the curb, and her angry voice followed Mark as he ran. Mark passed a policeman, and the man tried to stop him. He juked around him and kept running. His apartment was only 3 blocks away, and he knew he could make it. "I'm scared, Mark." That gave him a burst of speed. Just hold on. I'm almost there," he huffed as he ran across the street, the sound of horns blaring behind him. I feel cold. "Please, stay with me, Lisa," he almost cried, tears dripping down his face onto the phone. He could see their apartment building as it loomed in the distance. The gray facade had never looked better to him, and he knew it was only a block away. He ran flat out, his suit coat billowing behind him, his button-up hanging long around his waist. He looked crazed, but he didn't care. He was going to see her. He was going to save her. He was going to be there for her. "Mark," she gasped. Her voice had become as fragile as glass. "I'm here, honey. There's an ambulance outside the complex, as well as several police cars. What's going on? Has someone called for help? Why didn't you say so? I just wanted to let you know my time's almost up." His breath hitched in. Don't talk like that. We'll have more time. I see paramedics outside. They must be here for you." "No, they've already come and got me, Mark." He stopped as he watched them roll out a gurney with a black bag on it. The bag was zipped up, the contents not moving. The paramedics loaded it into the back of an ambulance and closed the door. They rolled away without ever seeing Mark at all. "You're hearing my voice because I signed up for Final Thoughts. I know you don't like them, but I wanted you to have some closure if something ever happened to me. I remember how much it messed me up when my parents died, and I never got to say goodbye. I've only got about a minute left, Mark, but I want to tell you that I love you, and I'll always love you. Mark stood on the sidewalk as the cold numbness rushed over him. He was hearing her voice for the last time. She was already gone, already dead, and now he was listening to the last words she would ever say. This was grisly. It was a joke. How could they put a time limit on how long he could spend with his wife? Mark, she whispered, her voice a thin edge of dandelion fluff. He swallowed his emotion. This was his wife's final moments. He didn't want them to be meaningless. I love you too, Lisa. I've always loved you. Goodbye, Mark. I love you, she whispered. She sounded happy. The line went dead. I think that'll just about do it for today's Cozy Horror. Oh, but don't be sad. I'll be back tomorrow with more Cozy Horror and more times by the fire spent with good friends and good stories. Till then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.